Let's start with where we are right now. The conflict in Israel isn't just another headline halfway around the world. It's a defining test of whether America still stands for its allies, its principles, and the security order we built after World War II. Over the past month, we've seen a fragile ceasefire falter and flare-ups erupt again along Gaza's border. Hamas has used every pause to rearm and reposition. Israel, in turn, has maintained its strikes on militant infrastructure, insisting that leaving Hamas intact is not an option. Meanwhile, the world watches in fatigue another Middle Eastern war, another news cycle of grief. But here's the truth. This isn't just about Gaza or even Israel. It's about whether the United States has the resolve to stand by a democratic ally under siege, even when it's politically inconvenient. I'll tell you this, America's support for Israel has never been simply sentimental. It's strategic. Israel is a democracy surrounded by regimes that either sponsor terrorism or turn a blind eye to it. When Hamas slaughtered civilians last year, including Americans, that wasn't a border skirmish. It was an attack on the very idea that innocent life deserves protection. And when the U.S. stands with Israel, we're sending a message far beyond the region. We're telling Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing that America doesn't abandon its partners when things get hard. But the political climate has shifted. Polls show growing skepticism among younger Americans. Protests have filled campuses, and in Washington, voices on the far left are pushing to cut off aid to rethink our relationship with Israel. They speak as if Hamas were some misunderstood resistance movement rather than a terrorist regime that uses civilians as shields and aid convoys as cover. Let's be honest, moral confusion is not compassion. It's weakness dressed up as virtue. Israel today is fighting not only for its survival, but for the precedent it sets. If a democratic nation can be massacred and then lectured for defending itself, what lesson do other allies take? What message does that send to Taiwan, to Ukraine, to any partner counting on American resolve? The stakes are global. Still, the reality on the ground is brutal. Civilians are suffering. Aid groups are struggling to operate. Every bomb dropped in Gaza is broadcast instantly, stripped of context, and fed into a global outrage machine. And here's where leadership matters. America has to walk that fine line between backing our ally and pushing it to protect innocence. That balance defines statesmanship, but too often, this White House treats it as a PR exercise instead of a moral responsibility backed by clear strategy. What I want listeners to understand is that the U.S.-Israel alliance isn't a product of lobbyists or pressure groups. It's the recognition that in a world full of tyrannies and terror sponsors, there are precious few nations willing to take the moral and physical risks that Israel does. And when we stand with Israel, we're not choosing sides in a distant fight, we're defending the front line of Western civilization itself. As the smoke rises over Gaza and negotiations stumble through another round in Cairo or Doha, the question for America is simple. Do we still mean it when we say we stand with our friends? Or are we content to signal sympathy while retreating into moral relativism? That's what's really being tested here, our credibility. How did we get here? You can't understand today's headlines without tracing the long arc of the U.S.-Israel relationship, a bond forged not in convenience but in conviction. Since 1948, when President Truman became the first world leader to recognize the newborn state of Israel, America has stood by that promise. Over the decades, that alliance has weathered wars, peace accords, and political shifts on both sides of the ocean. And yet, through all of it, one truth is held. The Middle East may be divided by faith, tribe, and border, but the partnership between Washington and Jerusalem is anchored in shared values and a shared understanding of what it means to fight for survival. Now, that word survival isn't rhetoric in Israel. It's the daily calculus of a nation the size of New Jersey, surrounded by hostile powers that have, at various times, sworn to wipe it off the map. Think about that. Every time Israel mobilizes, it isn't out of choice. It's out of necessity. From the Six-Day War to the Yom Kippur War, from the suicide bombings of the Second Intifada to the rocket fire of Hamas, the pattern repeats. Israel defends, the world condemns, and the United States is left to balance principle with pressure. Let's be clear, that balancing act didn't start with this administration. Every president, Republican or Democrat, has struggled to navigate it. Reagan and Bush backed Israel, but pressed for restraint. Clinton tried to broker peace in Oslo. Obama distanced himself publicly, yet deepened intelligence ties privately. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem and brokered the Abraham Accords, reshaping regional alliances in a way few predicted. Each chapter reflects the same question: how do you support an ally that fights existential wars in the age of social media outrage? Then came October 2023, the day Hamas crossed into southern Israel, slaughtering families in their homes and kidnapping civilians. The illusion of containment shattered. Israel's response, fierce and unrelenting, marked not just a counterattack, but a reckoning. Hamas had crossed every moral and strategic line, and yet within days, international outrage turned not toward Hamas, but toward Israel. The pattern reemerged. A terrorist group hides behind civilians, provokes retaliation, and then weaponizes global sympathy. That's not resistance, that's psychological warfare dressed as liberation. And where does America fit into that? For decades, U.S. support from weapons to intelligence to vetoes at the UN has served as both shield and leash. We back Israel's right to self-defense, but we urge restraint, we negotiate pauses, we send envoys. It's a delicate dance, but make no mistake, that dance is what keeps deterrence alive. When the U.S. hesitates, when our message wavers, the entire region takes note. Iran tests boundaries, Hezbollah creeps closer, the Houthis fire at shipping lanes, and our adversaries, China, Russia, watch with interest, wondering if American guarantees still mean what they used to. I'll tell you what I believe. Peace doesn't come from pretending both sides share equal blame. It comes from clarity, moral clarity. Israel didn't choose this war, Hamas did. Israel didn't violate a ceasefire, Hamas did. And every civilian death, while tragic, lies ultimately at the feet of those who started this fire. Until we say that plainly, no negotiation will last, no truce will hold, and no peace will endure. So as we examine the roots of this conflict, we're really examining the roots of American resolve. Are we still the nation that stands by its word? Or have we grown so weary of the world's chaos that we'll sacrifice allies just to silence our own discomfort? That's the question history will ask of us, and it won't accept excuses. Let's talk about what the United States has actually done and what it hasn't in the last several months. Because beneath all the rhetoric, there's a very real question: what does American support for Israel look like in practice right now, in 2025? First, the hard power. Since the October 2023 attacks, the U.S. has approved tens of billions in aid defensive systems, precision-guided munitions, and emergency resupplies of Iron Dome interceptors. The Biden administration has kept 2 carrier strike groups in the eastern Mediterranean as a deterrent signal to Iran, Hezbollah, and anyone else thinking of widening the fight. Those ships aren't just symbolic. They carry aircraft capable of striking targets from the Red Sea to the Persian Gulf. It's the clearest reminder that when America says we stand with Israel, that phrase is backed by the most powerful military in the world. But power isn't only measured in missiles. Diplomacy has been just as central and in some ways more complex. The U.S. has spent months shuttling between Jerusalem, Cairo, and Doha, trying to broker ceasefires, hostage exchanges, and humanitarian corridors. On paper, it looks like progress, brief pauses, aid trucks moving through Rafah, foreign nationals evacuated. In reality, each deal unravels within days because Hamas plays by no rules but its own. They take the aid, rebuild the tunnels, and use civilians as cover once more, and every time Israel is blamed for resuming its strikes. That's not diplomacy, that's a hostage crisis played on repeat. Now, here's what worries me. The administration talks about balance, but balance without moral clarity becomes appeasement. We've heard officials describe Israel's operations as disproportionate, even as Hamas continues to fire rockets into civilian neighborhoods. We've seen the State Department leak frustration about Netanyahu's government as if the problem were Israel's determination to survive, not Hamas's determination to annihilate. Let me be blunt. When Washington wavers publicly, it emboldens terrorists privately. The truth is, Israel's war effort depends not only on its soldiers, but on American consistency. When we cut off ammunition shipments or delay arms approvals to make a political point, we aren't punishing Netanyahu, we're punishing the Israeli people. We're signaling to every enemy of the United States that alliance with us comes with conditions written in pencil. Now, some will argue that America's role should be humanitarian first. I understand that impulse. No one wants to see civilians trapped in rubble or starving in Gaza. But there's a moral difference between compassion and surrender. Humanitarian aid that ends up in the hands of Hamas isn't aid, it's subsidy for terror. The challenge then is not to stop caring, but to care wisely, to ensure that compassion doesn't become complicity. Meanwhile, the strategic picture has widened. The U.S. has conducted strikes on Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria after attacks on American bases. The Houthis in Yemen continue to threaten Red Sea shipping. Hezbollah has tested the northern front. In every one of these arenas, American presence, even a single destroyer or drone, has made the difference between escalation and deterrence. That's the value of leadership. You don't have to use the sword every time, but the world needs to know you still have one and that you're not afraid to draw it when justice demands. What's missing today is not American capability, but American conviction. We still have the strength to shape the region. What we lack is the clarity to define what that strength is for. The goal isn't endless war, it's peace through strength, the Reagan doctrine that kept this nation safe for decades. Israel understands that instinctively because it lives it daily. The question is whether Washington still does. And so I'll leave this section on a thought. Alliances don't crumble overnight. They fade when we stop treating them as sacred. The U.S.-Israel alliance has held for 3/4 of a century. Whether it holds another depends not on Israel's resolve, but on ours. There's been a lot of talk lately about ceasefires, phased deals, humanitarian pauses, confidence-building steps. Every headline seems to announce another breakthrough that lasts all of 48 hours. And I'll be honest, most of these so-called agreements are exercises in illusion. They buy time for Hamas, they earn applause for diplomats, and they leave the core issue, the existence of a terrorist army embedded in Gaza, untouched. But this most recent deal, the one negotiated with Qatari and Egyptian mediation, reveals something important about where America stands and where we might be headed. Under that framework, Hamas was supposed to release hostages in exchange for limited pauses and humanitarian access. Israel agreed not because it trusted Hamas, but because it trusted the United States to hold Hamas accountable if they broke the deal. Predictably, Hamas stalled, trickled out a few captives, and then broke off talks entirely. And what did we do? We urged restraint, we issued statements, we appealed for both sides to de-escalate as if one side were a lawful government and the other weren't a genocidal militia funded by Tehran. Now, I'm not dismissing diplomacy. Negotiation matters, especially when American citizens are among the hostages. But diplomacy without leverage is theater, and leverage comes from credibility. The Biden administration's approach has been to mix public scolding of Israel with quiet aid behind the scenes, the worst of both worlds. It alienates Israelis and reassures no one else. In contrast, when America speaks with one clear voice, when we say to Hamas, release every hostage or face annihilation, the calculus changes. That's how you make deals that last, through strength, not softness. Let me tell you what every serious actor in the region understands. Hamas doesn't fear the United Nations. It doesn't fear press conferences in Brussels or statements from Foggy Bottom. It fears two things: Israeli resolve and American backing. When both are strong, Hamas hides. When either wavers, it resurfaces. And right now, it senses hesitation. That hesitation shows up not only in policy but in tone. We see it when American spokesmen call for proportionality as if war were a math equation. We hear it when State Department officials leak their disagreements with Israeli strategy. We even hear it when certain members of Congress, including some in my own chamber, question why Israel should continue receiving U.S. military support. Let's be clear, no country on earth has shown more restraint in war than Israel. No country on earth has faced an enemy more committed to hiding behind civilians. And yet Israel remains the only democracy whose self-defense is treated as a global debate topic. You want to talk about proportionality? Imagine Washington, D.C., after a terror group killed over 1,000 Americans, burned families alive, and took our citizens hostage. How long would we wait before responding? How many lectures would we tolerate from foreign governments telling us to de-escalate? We'd respond with everything we had, and rightly so. Why should Israel be held to a double standard simply because it wins? The truth is, America's position in these talks reflects a broader confusion about what leadership means. For decades, our power in the Middle East wasn't just our military might, it was our moral steadiness. Friends knew we'd stand firm, enemies knew we'd stand up. Today, that moral compass is spinning. We send mixed signals, we undercut allies to appease critics, and we treat deterrence like a campaign slogan instead of a doctrine. But here's the reality. There can be no durable ceasefire until Hamas is dismantled, not weakened, not contained, dismantled. Because peace built on terror's survival isn't peace, it's a countdown to the next massacre. And when America insists on premature peace for the sake of optics, we're not promoting stability. We're guaranteeing future bloodshed. So yes, we should push for humanitarian aid. Yes, we should protect innocents wherever possible. But let's do it without sacrificing the one truth that holds this alliance together. Israel has the right and the duty to defend itself completely. The moment we forget that, we've lost not just a policy debate, but our moral footing in the world. Let's widen the lens for a moment, because this isn't just Israel versus Hamas. What's unfolding across the Middle East is a chessboard being rearranged by Iran and its proxies, and every move is meant to test whether America still has the will to play defense. You've got Hezbollah in the north, firing rockets from Lebanon. You've got Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq harassing our bases and contractors. You've got the Houthis in Yemen attacking commercial ships and threatening global trade routes. This isn't a series of isolated brush fires. It's a coordinated strategy, a pressure campaign from Tehran designed to stretch Israel thin and bleed American credibility. Iran's fingerprints are everywhere. Every rocket that flies out of Gaza, every drone that buzzes near an American destroyer, every propaganda clip glorifying resistance, it all traces back to the same regime that chants death to America in its parliament. Iran doesn't want peace in the region, it wants control, and it uses terror groups as its chess pieces to get there. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, different names, same master, and the strategy is simple: force the U.S. to choose between chaos and retreat. Now, I've said this on the Senate floor before, deterrence doesn't come from well-worded press releases, it comes from consequences. When Iran funds terror and faces no cost, it learns that America bluffs. When it strikes and we merely condemn, it learns that America fears escalation more than failure. And when it sees our administration hesitate to support Israel unequivocally, it learns the most dangerous lesson of all, that the West's backbone is negotiable. Let's not forget, it was the same Iran that armed Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and militias in Iraq that now races toward nuclear capability. Their centrifuges keep spinning while the world's diplomats keep talking. The sanctions that once brought Tehran to its knees have been half-heartedly enforced, oil revenues are up, and the Revolutionary Guard is flush with cash again. Money that doesn't go to schools or hospitals, it goes to missiles. And those missiles eventually get pointed at our allies and our troops. Here's what people sometimes miss. Israel isn't just fighting Hamas, it's fighting Iran's strategy of encirclement. The goal isn't simply to destroy one terror network, it's to break the entire ring of proxies that Iran uses to hold the region hostage. And America's role in that fight is not optional, because if we retreat, that ring tightens not just around Israel, but around every Western interest, from the Mediterranean to the Strait of Hormuz. And look at how China and Russia are exploiting this chaos. Beijing buys Iranian oil under the table, keeping Tehran alive economically. Moscow provides drone tech and political cover at the UN. Both benefit from seeing the U.S. bogged down, divided, and morally uncertain. When America hesitates in the Middle East, authoritarian powers elsewhere gain ground. The world is more connected and more dangerous than it's been in decades. So what should America do? We should reassert deterrence with clarity and force, enforce every sanction on Iran like we mean it, strike back hard when our troops are attacked, give Israel the tools it needs to win decisively, and make it clear in public, not just private, that an attack on our ally is an attack on us. Because right now, the perception of weakness is the most dangerous weapon in the region, and we're the ones handing it out. Here's the irony. Peace through strength isn't a slogan. It's the only language tyrants understand. When we project doubt, they push. When we project resolve, they pause. And right now, America needs to stop speaking in whispers. We need to remind our adversaries that freedom is still armed, still awake, and still willing to defend itself. Back home, the battle over Israel isn't just fought in the halls of Congress, it's fought in classrooms, city streets, and dinner table conversations. And what's striking today is how divided Americans have become over something that once seemed simple, standing with a Democratic ally under attack. For decades, support for Israel was bipartisan, almost instinctive. Republicans and Democrats alike understood the stakes. But lately, you can feel the ground shifting. Polls show a generational split wider than we've ever seen. Older Americans still solidly supportive. Younger Americans increasingly skeptical or outright hostile. Walk across a college campus today and you'll see that shift on full display. Protesters chant slogans that echo propaganda straight from Tehran. From the river to the sea, they shout many without even understanding what that phrase means. The eradication of the world's only Jewish state. Professors frame terror as resistance, student governments vote for boycotts, and the loudest voices are often the least informed. It's not grassroots idealism, it's indoctrination disguised as empathy. Now, don't misunderstand me. Dissent is part of democracy. Every American has the right to protest. But when activism turns into anti-Semitism, when Jewish students are harassed or silenced, that's not free speech, that's bigotry. And when institutions tolerate it, they don't just fail Jewish Americans, they fail the principles that define this country. I've seen university presidents twist themselves into knots to condemn microaggressions on one hand and then suddenly discover moral relativism when confronted with open hatred of Israel. That hypocrisy is poisonous. And the rot doesn't stop at academia. In Congress, we've watched members openly side with Hamas propaganda. We've seen resolutions condemning Israel for war crimes introduced by lawmakers who couldn't bring themselves to condemn the slaughter of Israeli families. We've heard presidential candidates hedge their support for Israel because they're afraid of losing votes in activist circles. Let's call it what it is, moral cowardice. There's no nuance in defending terrorists. But here's where leadership matters. I've always believed that truth has to be spoken even when it's unpopular, especially then. America's moral compass doesn't need to align with Twitter trends. Our foreign policy shouldn't be written by the loudest mob on social media. It should be rooted in principle. And the principle is simple. Civilized nations don't glorify terror, they confront it. This divide over Israel also reveals something deeper about where America's culture is heading. There's a growing discomfort with the idea of moral clarity. People would rather live in the fog where every side is complicated, every issue gray. But the Middle East doesn't operate in gray zones. Hamas doesn't debate ethics before firing rockets at kindergartens. Iran doesn't worry about balanced narratives before sending drones towards civilian airports. The choice between good and evil isn't theoretical over there, it's survival. And maybe that's why this moment is so revealing for us as a nation. Because how we respond to Israel's struggle says something about who we are. Do we still believe in good and evil? Do we still believe freedom deserves defending? Or have we become so cynical, so comfortable, that we flinch at the cost of conviction? I'll tell you this, moral clarity has never been more necessary or more endangered. Now, I know there are Americans, good people, who look at the suffering in Gaza and feel torn. They see the images of children caught in war and wonder if our support for Israel makes us complicit. That's a human reaction, and I respect it. But we must separate compassion from confusion. Compassion demands we help innocents. Confusion leads us to blame the victim of terror instead of its perpetrator. The United States can and must do both. Stand with Israel and stand for humanity. The two are not opposites, they're intertwined. What's at stake isn't just a foreign policy position, it's our moral posture as a nation. The world watches how we handle this debate, and they're drawing conclusions. If America can't defend its friends when it's hard, then who can trust us when it's their turn under fire? Our strength abroad begins with moral confidence at home. Now, let's get to the heart of what makes this conflict so hard for America to navigate the tension between law, morality, and strategy. Every time Israel defends itself, the world invokes the language of international law. Headlines cry out about proportionality, collective punishment, war crimes, but very few people stop to ask the simplest question: who wrote those rules and who actually abides by them? Israel, for all its flaws, fights within a framework of legality that no terror group ever will. It warns civilians before strikes. It opens corridors for aid. It holds itself to standards that would be unimaginable for Hamas or Hezbollah. That's not propaganda, it's verifiable fact. But the moral asymmetry of this war gets erased by a media machine that thrives on equivalence. A bomb in Gaza is treated the same as a massacre in Israel, as if intent doesn't matter. But in law and in morality, intent is everything. Let's be honest. The modern battlefield has changed, but the legal playbook hasn't caught up. We're dealing with enemies who hide in hospitals, who store weapons under mosques, who use schools as human shields. They do this deliberately because they know Western democracies will hesitate. They turn our compassion into their camouflage, and yet when Israel strikes those legitimate targets, it's condemned for the civilian toll, a toll engineered by Hamas itself. That's not just immoral. It's cynical warfare designed to exploit the world's conscience. Now, let's look at Washington. Congress is divided between those who believe our alliance with Israel is a moral obligation and those who see it as a liability. You can hear it in every appropriations debate, every foreign aid amendment. Some want to impose conditions as if survival were a negotiable term. Others talk about reevaluating the relationship code for cutting support altogether. I've sat in those committee hearings. I've listened to colleagues suggest we should use arms sales as leverage to shape Israeli policy. Here's my response. If we start treating allies like adversaries, we'll soon have no allies left. But the debate isn't just about Israel. It's about America's credibility. When we draw red lines and then blur them, when we promise partnership but deliver lectures, when we signal doubt on our own commitments, that's when deterrence dies. Our enemies notice, Iran notices, Russia notices, China notices. And so does every small nation wondering if America's word still means what it used to. I'll tell you this, as someone who spent years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, moral clarity and strategic clarity go hand in hand. The most effective foreign policy isn't built on guilt or fear, it's built on conviction. That's what Reagan understood. That's what Truman understood when he recognized Israel in 1948, despite fierce opposition. They knew leadership sometimes means standing alone, not because you enjoy it, but because history doesn't reward cowardice. But here's the paradox. The more America hesitates in the name of restraint, the more violence fills the vacuum. We've seen it time and again in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan. When America retreats, evil doesn't retire, it advances. The moral burden doesn't vanish just because we step back. It multiplies. And nowhere is that clearer than in the Middle East, where every inch of American retreat is filled instantly by Iran, by Russia, by chaos. Now, some argue that Israel's war risks destabilizing the region. My answer is the region was destabilized long before Israel struck back. It's been destabilized by decades of terror funding, by weak Western responses, by the idea that you can appease radicals into reason. Peace isn't born from appeasement. It's born from strength enforced by law. And law without enforcement is just words on paper. So yes, we should care about humanitarian law. We should care deeply about minimizing civilian harm. But we should also remember who violated those principles. First, the terrorists who started this war and who hide behind the innocent. If we forget that, if we let false moral symmetry replace truth, then we've handed victory to those who despise both law and liberty. In the end, America's challenge is not balancing morality and strategy. It's remembering that real morality requires strategy. Compassion without courage is surrender by another name. And no nation that confuses the two can remain free for long. When we talk about risk in the Middle East, we're not just talking about military escalation. We're talking about a chain reaction that can redraw the global order overnight. Think about how fragile the situation is right now. Hezbollah keeps firing from the north. The Houthis are still targeting ships in the Red Sea, raising insurance costs and choking global trade. Iran's Revolutionary Guard continues pushing nuclear enrichment. Every one of these flashpoints could erupt into something far larger, and the difference between containment and catastrophe often comes down to whether America stands firm or flinches. The worst-case scenarios aren't abstract. If Hezbollah opens a full northern front, Israel will respond with overwhelming force, and rightly so. that would pull Lebanon into the abyss, potentially drawing Syria along with it. If Iran sees that chaos as cover and rushes to weaponize its nuclear stockpile, Israel will act preemptively. And if that happens, we're looking at a war that drags in the Gulf states, the United States, and possibly even Russia through back channels with Tehran. That's the domino chain, and every piece is trembling right now. But let's be honest, the greatest risk isn't what Israel will do, it's what America won't do. Deterrence is like gravity, invisible until it's gone. When we signal hesitation, when we let attacks on our troops go unanswered, when we treat red lines like rough drafts, we invite chaos. Just a few weeks ago, Iranian-backed militias launched rockets near American positions in Iraq. We responded with limited strikes, carefully calibrated, as always, but Tehran reads that caution as permission. They believe we're too weary, too divided, too self-doubting to respond with force, and that belief, left unchallenged, is what starts wars. Now, there's another layer to this. The world's energy markets still depend on stability in that region. If the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea becomes a war zone, oil prices will skyrocket, inflation will surge, and working Americans, families trying to afford groceries and mortgages will feel the shock first. That's the quiet truth no one wants to admit. Chaos abroad always cashes out at home. Every missile fired in the Middle East eventually shows up as a price tag in America. And here's where leadership becomes more than a word. Our adversaries, whether it's Tehran, Moscow, or Beijing, don't just test our weapons, they test our patience. They watch our news cycles, our protests, our elections. They measure how quickly we turn inward, how easily we forget the bigger picture. When they see Congress fighting over supplemental aid for Israel, when they see presidential candidates hedging on basic support for an ally, they draw conclusions. That America's unity is brittle and our resolve is seasonal. I'll say this as plainly as I can. Deterrence doesn't come from press statements. It comes from willpower. The Iron Dome isn't powered by technology alone. It's powered by trust that the U.S. will keep resupplying it. Our bases in the region don't deter attacks by their presence. They deter attacks by the certainty that those attacks will be answered. The moment our enemies start to doubt that certainty, deterrence collapses and the cost of restoring it doubles. You want to avoid a regional war? Show the world that America still means what it says. Stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, not as charity, but as strategy. Make Iran understand that the cost of escalation will exceed anything it can bear. And remind every hostile actor watching from the sidelines that this is still a world where freedom defends itself. Because here's the irony of strength. The more clearly you display it, the less often you have to use it. Peace doesn't come from the absence of conflict, it comes from the presence of resolve. And right now, that resolve is being watched by allies from Taipei to Kiev. They're asking themselves the same question. Israel is asking, will America hold the line when it matters most? So what should America do? That's the question everyone keeps asking, and too often the answers fall into two extremes. On one side, you've got those who say, withdraw completely, let the region handle itself. On the other, you've got those who call for open-ended deployments and blank checks. Both miss the mark. The real path forward, the one that protects American interests and moral credibility, lies in strength paired with strategy. Strength without direction is reckless. But strategy without strength is just wishful thinking. Let me lay it out plainly. America's job is not to fight Israel's wars. It's to make sure Israel wins the ones it has to fight. That means giving our ally the tools, not the permission to defend itself fully. It means restoring every Iron Dome battery that's fired 1,000 times over. It means keeping precision munitions flowing, not as a favor, but as a statement. Because if the United States starts rationing support based on political optics, we're not just weakening Israel, we're teaching the world that alliances with America come with expiration dates. Now, part of leadership is knowing where force ends and diplomacy begins. And I'm not blind to that. The U.S. should keep pressing for a post-Hamas order in Gaza, one that replaces a terrorist regime with governance that actually values life over death. That won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But it starts by rejecting the fantasy that Hamas can be part of the solution. It can't. You can't reform an ideology that celebrates martyrdom and teaches children that killing Jews is holy. You can only defeat it. That's the first step toward peace. The second step is enforcing real consequences for Iran. No more waivers, no more secret back channels that free up billions in frozen assets. Every dollar that flows to Tehran funds another rocket, another drone, another hostage crisis. We know this. The intelligence is clear. So let's stop pretending diplomacy with the Ayatollahs is anything more than delay disguised as dialogue. If they want relief, they should earn it by ending enrichment, by dismantling proxies, by proving with action, not promises, that they've changed. Until then, sanctions should bite hard and consistently. The third step is moral clarity at home. We need leaders from both parties willing to say the simple truth. Israel is not the problem. Terrorism is. The United States has a moral obligation to call evil by its name and to stand with those who confront it. That means no more moral equivalence in press briefings, no more both sides language when one side slaughters civilians and the other defends them. The world may be complicated, but right and wrong aren't. Fourth, we need to rebuild American deterrence globally because this isn't happening in a vacuum. China is watching our response to Israel as a rehearsal for Taiwan. Putin is watching as a test of Western resolve. When America leads clearly in one region, it strengthens peace in others. When we waffle, it invites aggression everywhere. So yes, this is about the Middle East, but it's also about whether free nations still believe in their own survival. And finally, we must remember that American strength doesn't mean arrogance. It means stewardship. It means using our power to defend civilization, not to dominate it. Israel doesn't need our lectures, it needs our partnership. The Arab world doesn't need our sermons, it needs our consistency. The world doesn't need America to be perfect, it just needs America to keep its word. I'll tell you this, if we want peace in that region, it won't come through hashtags or hollow resolutions. It'll come when our enemies understand, once again, that the cost of crossing America or its allies is unbearable. That's the only language tyrants, terrorists, and totalitarians understand. And history proves something else. When America stands tall, the world is more stable. When we shrink back, darkness spreads fast. So yes, we should aim for peace, but peace through strength, not surrender. We should demand accountability, but accountability guided by courage, not cynicism. And we should lead not because it's easy, but because no one else can. At the end of the day, this isn't just about Israel or even the Middle East. It's about who we are as a nation and what kind of world we're willing to live in. America's support for Israel has always been about more than strategy. It's been about principle. We stand with Israel not because it's perfect, but because it's free. Because it fights every single day for the right to exist in a region where that right is constantly challenged. And because in standing with Israel, we're standing up for something much larger. The belief that democracy and courage still matter in a world that too often rewards brutality. You know, I think about the generations before us, Americans who faced hard choices in darker times. They understood that moral clarity wasn't a luxury, it was a responsibility. Truman knew it when he recognized Israel against the advice of nearly every diplomat around him. Reagan knew it when he drew a line between freedom and tyranny that wasn't blurred by nuance. They didn't calculate public opinion before doing what was right, they shaped it. That's the kind of leadership we need again. Because here's the truth. The enemies of freedom don't sleep. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, they may differ in flag or name, but their ideology is the same. They despise liberty. They despise pluralism. They despise the very notion that men and women can govern themselves without fear. When they chant death to Israel, they mean it. And when they chant death to America, they mean that too. Our mistake, time and again, is pretending we're spectators in this story. We're not. We're part of it whether we choose to act or not. Now, I've heard people say, Senator, why not let the world handle its own conflicts? We've got enough problems here at home. I get that sentiment. But here's what I tell them. Weakness abroad always comes home. When America retreats, the bad guys don't go away, they expand. The radicals who burn flags in the Middle East inspire the ones who burn them here. The propaganda that poisons minds over there trickles into our classrooms, our media, our politics. The fight for civilization isn't happening in some faraway desert. It's happening everywhere. Truth and courage are under siege. So what does it mean to hold the line? It means recognizing that peace doesn't survive on hope, it survives on strength. It means supporting Israel not as a matter of charity, but of shared destiny. It means telling our children that right and wrong still exist, that freedom is worth defending, and that sometimes doing what's right means standing alone. America has always been the nation that others look to when times are darkest. The city on a hill, not because it's perfect, but because it's visible. That light still matters. And it's not just shining for Israel. It's shining for every nation that wonders whether courage still counts in the modern world. We can debate policy, budgets, and tactics all we want, but the fundamental truth doesn't change. When America leads, freedom survives. When America hesitates, evil advances. And that's why this moment, this conflict, is so much bigger than borders or politics. It's a test of our will, our clarity, and our faith in what this country stands for. So, to every listener who's followed this conversation, I'll leave you with this. America's strength isn't measured in weapons or wealth. It's measured in the courage to stand by our friends and face down our enemies, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely. That's how peace is preserved. That's how freedom endures. And that's why, in the Middle East and beyond, we must still hold the line.